This is my 2018 Major League Baseball season June thoughts as I recap what happened in the Major League Baseball season in the month of June. So to start off this video, I'm going to talk about some of the top stories that went on in the month of June. I'm going to start off with a huge blow to the Angels, and I think also a huge blow to baseball with the injury of Shohei Otani, who suffered a UCL injury in his elbow. As of right now, it's currently a sprained UCL. A lot of people thought he was going to have Tommy John surgery. He has been taking batting practice, and it looks like if he was to come back in full capacity, he would come back as a batter, which I think he'd be a little bit more valuable. I think it'd be a safer bet to have him be a hitter, but considering the lack of what the Angels have had as far as pitching is concerned, and hoping that he was going to be a two-way player for them to boost not only to back up Mike Trout, but also to boost that pitching staff. It's definitely somewhat of a blow for the Angels, and I think definitely kind of a blow to baseball not seeing him in action for the last month or so with this injury. I mean, he was really one of the top stories in Major League Baseball in the first couple months until his injury. So just definitely a huge blow to the Angels, who are in a tough division, and despite being over 500, they're not in a good spot to as they're trying to end that playoff drought and try not wasting another season of Mike Trout, probably the best player in baseball in the last few years. Moving on to one of the top stories in baseball, Jacob DeGrom. He's really been one of the best pitchers in baseball, despite the Mets' woes, and considering they've looked like one of the worst teams in baseball over the last month due to injuries and just poor play. After starting off 11-1, they're just towards the bottom in a very competitive NL East, and are just looking like they're sinking. But Jacob DeGrom, he's been really one of the best players for the Mets, and been one of the best pitchers in baseball this season. And he's been a trade. He's been rumored to be a top trading target for a lot of teams, but from looking at it, him and Noah Syndergaard, it looks like DeGrom, it's going to cost the team to acquire him a lot, especially since he's not a free agent until 2020. So I personally don't think Jacob DeGrom, considering how much the Mets are putting a price tag on him, is likely to be traded between him and Noah Syndergaard. I think Noah Syndergaard would probably be the person that gets traded most often, but he's on the disabled list right now. So when he comes back, and if he's able to be productive, I see the Mets trading Noah Syndergaard. However, DeGrom is a different story, but DeGrom's really, it's just too bad that the Mets are not a better team and he didn't have a better record. Otherwise, I'd think he's definitely one of the best pitchers, but I think it's definitely going to be that win-loss record is definitely going to be a big thing when it comes to who's going to win the Cy Young this year. And then another top story in baseball, the Astros and the Mariners were some of the hottest teams in the American League. I think they've kind of been underrated this season, both those teams. Surprisingly, the Astros, considering they're World Series champions, considering the big story in the American League when it comes to teams is the battle between the Yankees and the Red Sox. But the Astros, been a great team. Carlos Correa just got put on the disabled list, but the Astros being led by guys like Alex Bregman, Jose Altuve, George Springer, and led by some great pitchers in Charlie Morton, Justin Verlander, and Garrett Cole. They've been great. Seattle's kind of been surprising, even without Robinson Cano, who got suspended 80 games for a PED suspension, but they're being led by great players such as Gene Segura, James Paxton as one of their big pitchers, Mitch Haniger, D. Gordon, even a veteran guy like Denard Smith-Span. They've been really impressive, and I think the Astros, I think they'll be the top team in this division, but the Mariners, they're competing for a playoff spot, and they've looked very, very good at the beginning, at this first half. Let's see if they can keep it up into the second half as well. Moving on from stories to who some of the top players in the hitting category for baseball in the month of June. I'm going to start out with the American League. My top three players: J.D. Martinez, who has league leading as I'm recording this, 25 home runs. He's been one of the top players. Mike Trout, even though the Angels have been, kind of struggling with, or they are struggling without Shohei Otani. He's still one of the best in baseball, near the home run lead. Still a great defensive player. Really the reason that a big reason why the Angels are still over 500 is because of him. And Jose Ramirez, another guy who's competing in that home run lead in the American League. Cleveland's kind of looked weak. They're in first in a very weak American League Central this year, but he's been one of their top players that have been bailing them out, along with guys like Corey Kluber and Francisco Lindor. So those have been big things, and the reason the Indians are leading a weak division. But he's been one of their top players in baseball as of right now. And I think with what happened to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the fact that LeBron James left, I think Cleveland fans are definitely going to be looking at the Indians further. And then moving on to the National League, I'm going to start off Nolan Arenado. The Rockies kind of sputtered, but it is a little bit of a tight NL West. But because of bullpen struggles, the Rockies have kind of struggled and fell down in the NL West. But Nolan Arenado. He's been one of the best players in baseball in the National League, and still a great defender. Still has a lot of pop to his bat. I think if Colorado can get their pitching in order, and it looked like they kind of did in that LA series recently. So if they can get it together as far as the bullpen is concerned, maybe the Rockies can come back and compete for a playoff spot in the National League. Max Muncy, he's been kind of the surprise player for the Dodgers this year. He's got like 18 home runs. He's very impressive, especially with the loss of Logan Forsythe was on the disabled list for a while, and with the loss of Corey Seager, they were looking for a player to step up, and he's been one of their big guys that's been able to step up, and why LA has not fallen off, and they're back in it in the lead for the NL West. And then final player I'm going to talk about is Paul Goldschmidt. After his first 2 months, I don't think anybody thought he was going to get out of it, but he had an amazing June and was able to get out of his slump. Today he was just voted the National League Player of the Month. The NL Player of the Month was Alex Bregman. But Paul Goldschmidt really bouncing back, and why the Diamondbacks had a much better June over what they had in the month of May. After kind of up and down, and the Diamondbacks, they cannot do that in the month of July. Otherwise, considering LA and San Francisco are right behind them, they might fall out of a playoff spot if that were to happen. So we'll see what happens there. And then moving on to top pitchers, starting out with the American League, I'm going to go with Corey Kluber. Like I said before, Cleveland is really kind of getting bailed out and winning a weak division due to Corey Kluber is one of the reasons. He's been one of the top guys in baseball. Luis Severino, who's really helping the Yankees, and whose pitching staff isn't as good as the Red Sox or the Astros, but he's been one of their top guys, and he's looked very impressive for them. But I think pitching on a team where your hitters are Gary Sanchez, Aaron Judge, and Giancarlo Stanton, I think you get a little bit overshadowed, but that's okay. And then Justin Verlander, who's proving that age doesn't matter, and him going to Houston really revived his career, and he's been one of their best pitchers as well, and it's really helped out that good pitching staff between him, Charlie Morton, and Garrett Cole, we'll see, and Dallas Keuchel as well. So he's been really the top guy for that pitching staff. And then in the National League, Jacob DeGrom, has been one of the best pitchers in baseball, despite the Mets not being a good team this year. It just would be great if he could be backed up, and his team was better. Max Scherzer, Washington's kind of been up and down this season, but he's been one of their top guys, and why they're still in contention for playoff spots. And then John Lester for the Chicago Cubs. He's been really great for them, and it's kept the Cubs from going out of kind of like the Nationals from going out of a very tight NL Central, just like Max Scherzer in the NL East. But John Lester, he's been a great pitcher for the Cubs as well, and hopefully the Cubs, he's able to help that pitching staff out, and the Cubs are able to get their National League Central crown once again. And to conclude my video, I will be going over the current standings of each division in baseball, starting out with the American League East. As expected, very tight race between the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox. They've been, neck and neck. Really, the Red Sox have kind of had better sluggers than the New or the than the Yankees, surprisingly, led by J.D. Martinez and Mookie Betts, who they were able to get back. But the Yankees, they're staying tight with guys like Gary Sanchez, even though he's on the disabled list currently. Aaron Judge, Carlos Stanton starting to pick it up again. We'll see if Didi Gregorius and some of the other guys can pick up as well. But I think really the Yankees, I think the big thing they need to do if they want to get over the Red Sox is I think they really need to look for another starting arm for their pitching staff. So if they're able to find that, I think the Yankees will take over the Red Sox. And other standings in that division, Tampa Bay, if they were not, they've actually not been as bad as people make them out to be. They're in third place. This is kind of a tank year for them, but considering they sold off all their players in the off season, one game over 500. They're not as bad, but they're not going to compete in this division. Toronto, after kind of a decent start in the month of April, they've kind of been sputtering. Roberto Ozuna, their closer, got suspended 75 games for domestic violence, so not great there. One of the players that they were hoping they were going to bring up, one of their top prospects, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., he was put out, or he's out for a while, so they're not going to be able to call him up. And then Baltimore, probably the worst team in baseball, and Manny Machado, he's just counting his days before he gets traded, and a lot of teams are going to be looking at him as well in the trade. Moving on to the American League Central, Cleveland winning a very weak division. Detroit was kind of competing for that. Unfortunately, they lost one of their top players, even though he's not the player he was a few years ago, Miguel Cabrera, who suffered a ruptured biceps and is out for the rest of the year. But he's really, Detroit, ever since they lost him, they've really just fallen off, and they're probably going to be they're finally going to be in the rebuild mode after appearing like they were one step in the rebuild and one step competing. So that's just unfortunate for them. Minnesota, been probably the biggest disappointment this year. This was a team I picked to win the division, and they just fell off just due to some regression from everybody, and they've suffered the sophomore slump. Chicago, they're tanking. Kansas City as well. They're starting to sell off a lot of their players. They traded guys like Kelvin Herrera and John Jay. You'll probably see some other guys such as Mike Moustakas be traded as well. So it's really surprising for a team that went to back-to-back World Series and won a World Series in 2015. They're now in rebuild mode once again. And then to conclude the American League West, probably the most competitive division in baseball. Houston, they've been off to a great start, but Seattle is, like I've said before, the surprise team this year, and they're not too far off, only a half game back currently. The Mariners, they've been very surprising that they were finally able to compete this year, and they were able to do it. Oakland, they're one of the surprise teams, and if they continue to keep winning, they could potentially be buyers this year. But I personally don't think that's going to happen. Oakland could be this year's version of the Milwaukee Brewers, where they'll just come up short as far as competing for a playoff spot, but that being kind of exceeding expectations and having something to build off, they could compete next year. So, but that's been very they've been kind of under the radar, and we'll see how this season ends. I don't think they're a playoff team this year, but I think they will be next year if they continue to exceed expectations. The Angels only a game over 500 in fourth place. Just losing Shohei Otani and having to rely on Mike Trout's really starting to wear out on them, and their pitching staff still isn't as good. And then Texas in last place of that division as expected. And then moving on to the National League, starting out in the National League East, Atlanta, they've been one of the really have finally taken that next step and being led by guys like Ozzie Albers, Ronald Acuna Jr., who just came back, Freddie Freeman, and Dansby Swanson, just to name a few as far as their hitting core. They've been very impressive. Philadelphia, they were kind of my sneaky dark horse team to compete, and they've done that as well, led by guys like Rhys Hoskins. If they can get some more out of the top players they paid for, such as Carlos Santana and Jake Arrieta, they could be competing for a playoff spot as well. The Nationals, kind of a disappointment. They're kind of still there because of guys like Anthony Rendon. Bryce Harper, he's hit 20 home runs, but he's hitting under 220, and he's been kind of a disappointment. And who knows, maybe considering this is a contract year coming up for him, people might not pay him as much. So we'll see what happens there. The Mets, who fell off, I don't need to be reminded of that. And then the Marlins, it's expected in last place as well. Moving on to the NL Central, the Milwaukee Brewers, they're continued to look great. Probably one of the top teams in the National League next to Atlanta. They've looked great, led by guys like Lorenzo Cain, Christian Yelich, and Ryan Braun, just to name a few, as their hitting core. Their pitching staff still looks great. I mean, one of their top bullpen guys is probably one of the most underrated in baseball, and Josh Hader. So they keep it up. Chicago, despite some injuries, I think they're still competing, and they're trying to keep their National League Central crown. Chris Bryant was put on the disabled list. They did get Brendan Morrow back, as he's a huge part of their bullpen. They've been helped out by guys like Javier Baez and Alberto Mora Jr. Jason Hayward's starting to look like the player he was before he signed with the Cubs, and it's good for Chicago that he's starting to look like that player again. St. Louis has kind of been a little bit of a disappointment, considering they went out and got Marcell Ozuna, but I think they'll definitely, if they're still competing and they can get their record back to a decent place, they could be buyers and look for a piece to add in the trade deadline. And then Pittsburgh, who despite a good couple weeks in April, are where you would expect them. And Cincinnati, they're kind of interesting because they changed managers, and they've been a just above 500 baseball club. So Cincinnati, who knows, if they finish with 70 to 75 wins, maybe there's some hope in the city of Cincinnati to compete potentially, and not waste their hitting core, led by guys like Joey Votto and Scooter Gennett. So we'll see what happens there with the Cincinnati Reds. But there could be some hope for that long last place team in Cincinnati. And then finally moving on to the NL West, which has been a ridiculously tight division. Arizona was, like I've said before, finally got it going after a horrible May. Their offense woke up, led by Paul Goldschmidt. Their pitching has been, kind of up and down, but if they can get more out of some of the players like Zach Greinke, who's looked good in his last couple starts. They did get Robbie Ray back, I think, and Patrick Corbin's starting to look a little bit better. So I think those are going to be the three guys they're going to look at from that pitching staff. Clay Buchholz was doing well, surprisingly for him, but he got put on the disabled list. But the Diamondbacks are looking like they're going to get some players back soon. As it was announced today as I'm recording this, they're going to get A.J. Pollock back, who was their MVP for the first month and a half. They're getting stuff out of guys like John Jay, Ketel Marte. So we'll see what happens there. They did get Jake Lamb back. David Peralta's been very good for them. Their bullpen, led by guys like Archie Bradley and Yoshi Hirano, has looked good as well. LA has been able to pick it back up, and led by guys like Max Muncy, Cody Bellinger, Yasmani Grandal. They were able to get Clayton Kershaw back, even though I think they're going to be working him back in. Kenley Jansen's been able to pick it up. And Arizona and LA, those are kind of the two-man teams, but there's a couple teams behind them. But those are the two teams, along, I think, with the Phillies as well, that are expected to go after Manny Machado. And I'm going to give out a bold prediction. Whoever gets Manny Machado between the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers, personally, I think will win the division. I think he'll be the piece for either of those teams to win the division. And if one of those teams gets him, I think they'll win the division. The Giants, despite some injuries, they lost Evan Longoria and Hunter Strickland, but they're competing as well. They swept the Diamondbacks at home, so that was definitely a big spot. And they're 2.5 games back, tied with the Dodgers for second place. Colorado, their bullpen, after spending hundreds of millions of dollars, really faltered, But, if they can fix that up a little bit, and, they have Nolan Arenado, they have the hitting to do it. If they're able to fix the bullpen pieces up, they're only 6 games back of the NL West. Maybe they can pick it up and compete for a division, for a wild card spot. And then San Diego in last place at 11 games back. That's it for my video. As always, click like if you like the video, subscribe if you like the content on my channel, and leave your comments in the comments section below on what you thought of the 2018 Major League Baseball season, the month of June, and what your expectations for next month are as well. Stay tuned on my channel, as I will be having a lot of videos coming out, including my All-Star edition of the month of July, as I recap the first half of the Major League Baseball season, and my expectations and predictions for the second half of the Major League Baseball season. I'm going to be doing videos on the NBA offseason and the NHL offseason as well, concerning those 2 leagues' drafts and the free agency period, as a lot's been happening since it is now in the month of July concerning that. And check in the description below on my recent appearance on the Guns N' Roses Central podcast. So thanks to everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.